Welcome back to Thinking Solo. I'm Ryan Derousseau, founder of Thinking Cap Financial, and I am here with Gregory Milano of Fortuna Advisors. You might hear the dogs in the background. Love it. We are here talking about strategies for individuals in business and in life. And Greg has started a company for many years now. He's the founder and CEO of Fortuna Advisors, a strategic consulting firm for large businesses. Greg, thanks for joining us, and thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's very nice to join you.
Yeah. And I first met Greg years and years ago when I was a writer at Fortune, because he would always put out these reports that dig into the effectiveness and use of share buybacks. And it was a very interesting and unique set of research. And so when I decided to start this podcast, I was like, that is someone I've always kind of kept in my mind as he started his own firm. I don't think it was, I could be wrong, but I don't think it was a large firm necessarily, but you were doing some really, really interesting things. And so that's why I wanted to reach out now. So yeah, it's very exciting to be here, to have you here. That is, why don't we start off with just kind of learning about your journey? Like, how'd you come to Fortuna, and what led you to start the firm?
Sure. So I founded Fortuna almost 17 years ago. I was working at the time at Credit Suisse, and the financial crisis hit, and I was working in the specialty group, helping companies understand what was likely to happen to their share price if they did some sort of a transaction, whether it was an acquisition, a divestiture, or recapitalization, anything really that would affect the equity value of the company. We had some really advanced tools. And in the middle of the financial crisis, that was viewed, I guess, as being a little less important. And so most of my group, including me, co-head of the group at the time, was let go. And it was interesting because for a couple of years, I had wanted to leave and start my own business. I felt like I was going only very shallow with lots of companies every year. And I wanted to go much deeper with just a few companies and provide really substantive help. It turns out it's really hard to walk away from investment banking pay. So I didn't really pursue it. But then in the meeting, when my boss at the time was telling me that, most of my group was going to be gone, including me, I wound up spending over an hour telling him what my business plan was going to be. I didn't come up with the name Fortuna till after that, but for Fortuna. And what we've done for the last almost 17 years is pretty close to what I described in that meeting, which I'm, very, very proud of. If I just take a step back, just because the journey is an important part of kind of how I got here.
Yeah.
When I got out of school, I had an engineering degree, and I became a sales engineer for Westinghouse, selling all kinds of, equipment. And I didn't find that was really that satisfying. So in less than a year, I left, and I went back to a company I had worked at in the summers when I was going to school, the Grumman Corporation, now part of Northrop Grumman. And many members of my family had worked there, and I went there and I worked on aircraft and so forth. And that 5 years at that point was unbelievably important for me, because it really helped me to understand like what really happens inside companies. What are the frustrations that get in the way of trying to do what may seem obvious to people from the outside? And I think as an advisor for over 30 years now, I've benefited a lot from that early experience, actually being inside a company and understanding that things don't really happen the way they do in the textbooks. And so some period as an engineer, some period working for a company called Stern Stewart, the EVA company, doing things that are sort of similar to what I do now, a small period of investment banking in the middle, and then founded Fortuna, which has been by far the best part of my career, both in terms of the fun I have helping companies and the satisfaction that it actually is help that really helps them.
Yeah, I mean, I hear the engineer background, and I think, tinkerer and developer and builder, and that's kind of what you've done with Fortuna. Can you talk a little bit about sort of just go deeper into what you were kind of describing of the impact that engineering background had as you were building Fortuna?
Even if I go back before that, when I went to get my MBA at NYU, I went to school mostly with people that had business undergraduates.
Hmm.
When I was going into it, I thought that was a disadvantage being an engineer. It wound up being an unbelievable advantage, because I was never worried about the math. The math always came to me simply because, compared to some of the things I learned in engineering school, financial math is mostly pretty straightforward and simple. And so I could spend more time trying to understand the reasons why, the causes that are happening in capital markets or what have you, which I think really helped me a lot. And then when I started working with companies, I think I was always the person that wanted to do the plant tour, not because I wanted the company to think I was interested in the company, but because I was actually interested in seeing, what happened inside the company. And you just get a different perspective of what the real situation and problems are inside a company when you really can understand it operationally. I think when you're more of a financially oriented person, only, I think that, you see the numbers, you don't really totally understand necessarily why. And I think, it's really helped me a lot to understand why things are going wrong inside companies over the years.
Yeah, I could totally see that. I also love the fact that, like, you're working with very large organizations, and you're, not a one-man band, but like a small band, and you're going in and saying, "Okay, well, this is what needs to be done, this is what needs to be done." And you're almost taking that small business perspective inside an organization, and it's really like I always liken it to, I have a friend whose father was like in the cement business, and he realized how much money that they were wasting on energy. And so he built a business where he just goes in, shows them how to fix their energy costs, and he just sits back and collects the checks from the energy savings that they've done. And you couldn't do that though internally. You can only do that externally.
Yeah. I mean, there are certainly advantages to being outside the company. One thing I often say is we very often change the executive compensation and often the incentive compensation for many more people, in an organization. And so we wind up presenting to compensation committees. And there have been a few CFOs over the years that almost put their foot down and say, I'm going to do the presentation to the comp committee, not you. And there are so many advantages to having us do it. Obviously we've been doing this for years. And so our ability to answer questions, oh, that happened at this company and this is what we did and this is how it worked really well. Or I wouldn't do that because of this happened at this company. No CFO, no matter how much CFO experience they have, could bring that kind of experience to the table. But the other side of it is if they don't like it and they get mad about the issue, I get shot instead of an executive.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
It's really not a big deal to me. I go on to the next company. That hasn't happened many times in my career, but when it has happened, I think it's been good for the executives, we are the sort of front men. Just one thing about it, I think, as I was thinking about this interview, there was a thought that came in my mind that is a little different than what we were just talking about, but I just want to say this now because otherwise I'm going to forget about it. Some years ago, I hired a coach, and early in our work together, she said to me, "I'm going to help make you a better version of yourself." And I thought to myself that I really like the way that sounds. And I think that's what we try to bring to our clients. We want to help them become better versions of themselves, figuring out what in their management process is causing things to go wrong. Why are people too conservative or too risk taking? Why are they too short term or too long term focused? Why are they expanding too fast or too slowly? There are usually cultural things that get in the way and cause these problems. Culture and process that cause these problems. That fix the process and you educate people on what you want them to do, you can genuinely change the culture of an organization toward what we like to call an ownership culture. And when you get people thinking, acting like owners, they really do. The company really does become a much better version of itself. That's really, the objective is to get it's, I start from the area of finance and strategy, but in the end, it's behavior we're trying to change.
Yeah, that's very true. In terms of like, so if we go back to, the financial crisis and your team is being let go, and you said you were thinking about this for a couple years, but, I understand the pay is very good at that time and you didn't want to do that. But when you look at yourself now, was going out on your own something you always wanted to do, or was it something that slowly presented itself through the course of your career?
Well, I had a sort of a taste of it. So in the early 90s, I joined a company called Stern Stewart. They have a performance measure called EVA, Economic Value Added. The company's transformed over the years, but at that time, Stern Stewart, that's what the company was all about. And it's a financial measure that measures value, basically value creation. And I became a partner 5 years after I joined. And then shortly after that, I was offered the option to go and found Stern Stewart Europe. And so I moved to London with my family. My youngest child was born there and built, offices in Germany and in France and in Italy. And we built a business that was like 90% of the size of the US business in 3 years. And so even though I was a partner in a larger organization with partners that were, much senior to me in terms of influence and ownership percentage, that venture going to Europe and setting up that business, admittedly, with the bankroll of the parent company, which is
Sure,
very
sure.
different from when we founded Fortuna, gave me a taste of what it was like.
Mhm.
When I left there, I wound up going to investment banking, which is something I had wanted to do early in my career. And I'm glad I checked that box, but I didn't really enjoy that much. So, while I had that experience in a large organization, it was Credit Suisse, the now defunct Credit Suisse. The idea of going small and not, being told what to do by people that weren't very close to the problems and so forth just really became attractive.
Yeah.
I
And
think that was
talk about the, the downside when you're going small, like compared to that experience where not everything was at your disposal, but large disposal. And talk about the difference between that like bootstrapping sort of style versus what you were doing previously.
It's very different. When we have good years, my best earning years of my life have been at Fortuna, but it's been a very bumpy road. For example, I was always a generalist before I went to Credit Suisse, and when I was there, they put me in charge of energy. So I was focused on taking my group services to the energy industry. So I got to know a lot of people in Houston, and it was a very tight network. When you do good work in Houston, people tell their friends, and it's good. So when we founded Fortuna, our first clients were all in energy. And I think over our first 5 years, we've calculated that almost 90% of our revenue came from energy and energy services companies. I mean, if you looked at those first 5 years, I mean, the revenue, I mean, it just sloped up dramatically. It was a great run, and then the oil price fell from over $100 to 27. And, as every contract unwinded, nobody wanted to renew. And we went from decent revenue to basically zero run rate, within a matter of weeks and or months or a couple of months. Having to put money in to make payroll after just months ago you thought you were on, top of the world, is an extreme of situations that you just don't get when you're working for a company and you have a salary. The in the really good years, you do very well, but you always have to think about, what are the problems that are going to come. A couple of years ago we had inflation. Inflation raised the cost of goods sold of a lot of companies, and that caused them to look around their budgets and figure out what can we cut.
Hmm.
Non-essential consulting, was cut from a lot of places. And even though I could argue at the time that, you need me now more than you ever need me, people are myopically trying to get to an EPS number for the quarter. Same thing in other periods. We've had these sort of ups and downs. So your need to respond quickly and sort of think on your feet, how am I going to deal with this situation? When the oil price crashed, and we started chasing consumer companies and tech companies and healthcare companies, and we did very well in healthcare and consumer and pretty well in tech. But we never were even thinking about that before because it was so easy. You do good work in Houston for an energy company. Next thing you know, you're being introduced to one of their friends, their neighbor or whatever, who's CFO of another company. So it's a very different experience than what you get, as an employee of a company. Satisfying, but volatile.
Yeah. My brother's a carpenter. And so I had him build this, and it's kind of hard to see on screen, but essentially one is a straight line and one is a very curved line. And when you look at it, you think if you put two marbles at the top, you think that the straight line's going to finish first. But in fact, what happens is the momentum of the curves, the curved one finishes first. And so I like it because I have a lot of clients who deal with the same thing that you deal with, where it's very up and down.
Yeah.
And so I'm always like, that's the reality of the lifestyle. But like you can finish first in that way, but you also have to protect yourself. What protections did you build as you've started to learn about sort of the ups and downs of the business?
It took me a while, and in
Yeah.
fairness to my partners, Frank Hobson and Marwan Karame, they saw this sooner than I did. But the real key is when things are going really well, trying really hard to not have recency bias, which gets you to think it's going to keep going well forever.
Yeah.
The first two downturns that we faced, we had overhired during the good times. And that's tough on the people. It's tough on us financially. We usually hung on as long as we could with people to try to make sure we gave every chance for the business to, kind of turn. And this most recent best sort of peak in performance that we had, we were much more careful about how many people we hired to make sure that if we had a downturn, we wouldn't have to let anybody go. And everybody had to work harder during the good times, because they were being stretched thinner across more situations, had to work more hours to get the work done. But it was better for them because the bonus pool, which is a percentage of our profits, was spread across fewer people. So they got, they got the
Sure.
benefit of working hard. It wasn't like they didn't, get the benefit of it. But, and then when we had a downturn, we didn't have to think about letting anybody go or anything like that. It was, so
Yeah.
if you're in a volatile business like ours, you've got to be very careful with how you protect your fixed costs.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, like, I've worked in a business where I'm myself, it's only me, and
Hmm.
you're talking about a business where there's a handful of people, and the experience is the same because when things are good, you just buckle up and you just do, like, and you're just like, do it as much as you can, capture as much revenues as you can because you
Hmm.
know of what could turn the corner because you've experienced it, you've lived it. That's very fascinating. Talk about like a significant hurdle that you faced in the past as you grew the business. Was there, I mean, maybe it was that first time you really lost revenue for the first time, but was there one moment where you had to get past this hurdle? And once you got past that hurdle, you really started to see the business take off, or is it just a series of hurdles?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a series of hurdles. I think we've faced a number of challenges over time and some failures. The buyback return on investment work that we did that you wrote about in Fortune had a service that went with it to help companies better time their buybacks. And to this day, I think it's one of the most brilliant things we've ever come up with. And we hardly could find anybody that would pay us to do the work for them. You know, we could show companies that they could retire the same number of shares, in some cases for, $1 billion less if they better time their buybacks. And for some reason, we were just not able to sell that product. And, we really worked hard on it for a while. To this day, I don't totally understand why people were not interested. I think maybe it was just too novel and too new. They would talk to their bankers or their investors and they never heard of buyback ROI. And, it wasn't something that they really we're focused on. But you face these challenges. You put a lot of effort into things, and sometimes they work, and sometimes they don't work. Right now we're doing something very new. We've published research in the Journal of Applied Corporate Finance showing that companies that embrace a form of economic profit, which is like our performance measure is a modern cash-based economic profit measure, on average outperform the stock market by 7% a year. So this is evidence, capital market evidence, kind of proving that it works. The vast majority of companies outperform the market too. It's not just like a few outliers bring up the average or something like that. And some of these companies have been doing this for over 30 years, many of them for over 15 years. So it's something that works really well. Until now, if a company wanted to implement this kind of a framework, they had to hire us or the group we compete with at McKinsey. By the way, the leader of which I interviewed on my podcast recently. There's also a group at Boston Consulting Group that's very good at this work too. There are some other organizations that have some skills in the area, but for the majority of it, it's bespoke, big time consulting firms or us. We're very small. We're like 10 people, but it's expensive. It takes, 12 to 24 months, depending on the complexity of the organization, costs millions of dollars for bespoke consulting. And, smaller companies really have not had access. They could read, books like my book, Curing Corporate Short-Termism,
There you go.
and learn a lot about the process and the measures and so forth. Shameless plug.
No,
And
please.
the but without having the experience, I've been through it many times. It's very hard without an expert, really helping you. So we started last year developing something that we're getting ready to beta test and then launch this year, which is we haven't come up with a name for it yet, but it's a scalable version of what we do. It's like an assisted do-it-yourself program for companies to embrace value-based management, even down to very, very small companies. We've been developing computer-based training modules to educate people on, what it means to act like an owner. What are the traits of an ownership culture? What are the performance measures that encourage you to embrace those traits? How do you weave them into your decision-making and your planning and so forth? We've been developing how-to videos to teach people how to design and structure the measures and the incentives and so forth. We've been developing tools, decision tools that are HTML pages on a website that you'll get access to for subscribers to this service so that people, if they have to make decisions, make versus buy or price versus terms or different kinds of common decisions, there'll be templates that they can put a few numbers in and it'll help them make decisions without them having to, sort of think through the basic premise. Because we really want to get to operating people, not just financial people, in these companies. We've got a survey you can take to see how well aligned your management processes are with, creating shareholder value and trying to identify the obstacles, the things that need to change in how you plan or how you allocate resources or how you make investment decisions and how you price your product. So we're developing all these tools, and I've just scratched the surface in my description just now. There's a lot of other things that go with it, along with a small amount of like assistance. So, depending on the size of the company and the amount they're paying to be a subscriber, they'll get some access to our experts as little as a few hours per month up to more than that.
Yeah.
So that when they confront problems, they'll be able to get help. And so the idea of this whole new service is to be able to take what has worked really well for companies of the sort of $2 to $50 billion size and take it to companies down to even with 100 employees and be able to provide, this kind of capability for them. And, we've put a lot of investment into this, dedicated resources and so forth. And, as I said, we're going to be in beta testing soon so we can get a few companies using it so we can get their feedback. We should do this instead of doing that sort of thing. And then we'll have a launch as the months go by in this year. So that's our most exciting thing we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. And it really speaks to trying to turn that curve into a straighter line, because if you have the multiple business lines and whatnot, then you can get closer to that straighter line, especially if you're going down market like you are.
Yeah.
But you did mention short-termism, and I gotta say, like, I think this is probably the reason I was originally interested in the research in general, is because it's just a topic that I think, not to speak too broadly, but I think it goes well beyond just the way businesses are managed. I think it's the way people
Hmm.
manage their lives. They're really focused on too much short-term stuff, and really thinking long-term is really important, because if you think too short-term, you'll never make that career change, you'll never start that business, because there's always reasons not to do it.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
when you're looking long term, that's where you see the benefits and the potential and all that sort of thing. And I don't really have a question for you on that. I just love that mindset. And I gotta say, I bring that mindset into, like, I try to anyways, into like everything I do. Like, what's the long term impact of this?
Let me just comment on that because I think I have a slight nuance to what you said that
Yeah,
I'd like to
go for
add.
it.
So we have these traits of an ownership culture, and the last one is it's always about both the short term and the long term. Most companies, most organizations, and most people are too short termist. And so your point is very valid that they need to think more long term. But I've also worked with organizations that only care about the long term, not many,
Yeah, you
but
can't do
some.
that.
And they never produce any results. Every time something goes wrong, they're like, "I don't worry about it. We're here for the long term." The most successful entrepreneurs that I've worked with, they drive current performance as hard as anybody. I mean, it's amazing how much energy they can bring to the driving of current performance. But they would never get there by cutting an R&D program or a marketing program or an employee training program. They're not going to try to produce a quarterly earnings number by cutting those important investments in the future. Yet I see, large public companies doing that all the time. Oh, we're going to miss earnings. Oh, let's push that R&D project into next year. And then, we're going to de-staff the project, and then we're going to restaff it, and we're going to lose all the continuity. So much less likely to be successful, but we hit our earnings number. I mean, I've seen people offer discounts in December to pull January sales into December, at a discount. So you're losing profit that you would have gotten in January if you could have just waited. And it creates two problems. One is it artificially says you hit your budget, but then you have a hole in January you got to fill next December. You have to offer even bigger discounts to get more sales to pull in. And the year-end gaming that happens because of all the short-termism is terrible. So the being too short-termist is the bigger problem, but you can't be only focused on the long-term either. I think you need a good balance of the two.
Yeah, I mean, that's well said. Like, what I do, financial advising, we'll come up with a probability of success, and we'll say, oh, you have a 75% chance of this plan working out, or you have a 100% chance of this plan working out, or 20%. But,
Hmm.
and people look at that like they are being graded, like you get an A or a B or a C in school. But in reality, what it is like, are you robbing the future for today, or are you robbing today for the future? And you need
Hmm.
a sort of balance of that. And that's really
Yeah.
kind of what you're speaking to on the corporate level, but it also like bleeds down into how we like actually run our financial lives and probably our personal lives as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. I do remember our current financial advisor once saying you want to be in that 79 to 90% range. And I remember asking, why wouldn't I want to be 100%? And that means you're not living it up enough today. You're not
Yeah,
enjoying life
exactly.
enough. You have the resources to do more things, that you're not doing.
Yeah. I am curious. I ask every guest this, in terms like when you're running a business, you can really get just kind of lost in the business. So how do you kind of unwind? How do you relax? I'm a big movie fan, so that's how I go about it. But what do you do to kind of get yourself away?
It's a combination of things, and it's more things than it was when I was younger. I mean, when I was younger, I was working like a maniac
Yeah.
and traveling a lot, and I didn't have as much time for sort of uh, de-stressing. But I also don't think I needed it as much. I think as I've gotten older, I think the need to find other things to kind of counter the hard work
Hmm.
gets more and more important. But it's a combination of things. I'm probably I play pool volleyball in the community that I'm in Florida.
Very nice.
Um, Several days a week. It's a just a fun game. We play with like a beach ball. It's very it's competitive, but it's a lot of laughs and a lot of fun. I follow sports. I'm a Liverpool fan, and England, the defending champion right now, although they're not having a great year this year. I had my boys went to University of Miami. Miami's in the, Final Four of,
Yeah,
the
big time for
NCAA
you.
playoffs right now. So, sports are a good distraction. Movies too, but to me, when sports are available, I put a high priority on that just because I just get so engaged in the competition. It's just really gets your mind off of things, which is what you're looking for, right? You're looking for things that are going to not just get you away from the work, but are going to engage you. And I think it's really important that there's a combination of things that engage your mind and things that engage you physically. I've just started playing pickleball, which is much more exercise than the pool volleyball that we play. And I find it's just really good for me. So yeah, staying more active probably than I was in the sort of middle of my career, and having more time for getting your mind completely off of things. That's to me, that's how you deal with the intensity of a job.
That's fantastic. Any advice you'd give someone who was going to go out on their own and start, whether it's a one person or five person or whatever, any advice you'd give based on your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, just recognize that everybody's experience is different. And so anybody you get advice from is going to be the advice that worked for them, and it's not necessarily appropriate for your situation. Of my four kids, three of them have their own business, and none of them face any challenges that are like my challenges. They're very different businesses. And so that's one thing. The second thing is, as far as timing, I could have left Credit Suisse and started Fortuna sooner, but several problems would have happened. First of all, I would have left money on the table because in the short term, I was making more money there than I made in the early years at Fortuna. But secondly, I don't know what would have happened when the financial crisis hit if I already had the company running. Getting to the point with a good, with a good financial position launching in March of 2009, which seemed like a horrible thing at the time, was actually a great time to start. I mean, we were getting small contracts from people within 4 weeks of opening.
Hmm.
And, so we were able to increase our bank balances slightly while making payroll payments to the couple of employees that we started with. So I think finding the right time, I guess, is important. But don't just drop everything if you're in a good situation to go do it. You can be thinking about it and prepping and getting your mind around it. And even when I left Credit Suisse, I actually left in the fall, right around Thanksgiving. Real nice time to lay everybody off. And then didn't start the business until March 2nd. And so, we had plenty of time to think through the strategy, think through, all the details, and even get going on sort of what the pitch books would look like and so forth. So I just don't be in too much of a rush, I guess is the point. I mean that, doing the right amount of prep can really help you to be ready. And then the last comment I'll make is things change. Roll with the punches. Be much more like, Muhammad Ali, who could, take a hit and really not not feel it as much because he was so reactionary. React to the world, think about how you need to change and course correct, and don't be so wedded to certain tactics or even strategies that you wind up getting run over by the world changing around you. You got to be very, very flexible in what you do. And I mean, I can recall times when I wasn't flexible enough. So I'm not trying to say I've done this perfectly, but it is something I've learned that you do need to roll with the punches and accept that these things happen and just try to do the best.
That's fantastic. Where can people find you if they're interested to hear more, and especially plug that podcast of yours?
Thanks. So our website is fortuna-advisors.com. We have a lot of information on there, including all my podcasts in podcast form, but also in video form, and over 250 articles that we've written over the years, including, I'll just make one more plug, The Journal of Applied Corporate Finance, and for those of you watching on video, you can see it right now, did a special issue a little over a year ago called In Honor of Fortuna Advisors. And every one of these articles was written or co-written by us. A couple of them are roundtables that we were involved in. And it was a great, sort of recognition of our thought leadership. Our views are very well documented in the research behind them and all available on the publications page of our website. And my podcast is called Create More Value. It's a combination of interviews with CFOs, CEOs, board members, investors, academics, and some sessions where it's just me and one of my partners talking about different aspects of how we help companies, how we measure performance, how we design incentives, and so forth. So, there's a little bit of a lot of different things in the podcast, but it's all focused on giving people information to help them create more value. That's our sort of tagline.
Fantastic. Well, Greg, I appreciate you being here today. It means a lot, and this is fantastic. So thanks again. This has been Thinking Solo. You can find me on LinkedIn under my name or on YouTube at Thinking Solo. I will speak to you again soon. Keep grinding.